Hello there, my name is Gavin Walsh and today is Wednesday, December the 10th, 2025. Welcome to part 5 in the St. Kevin Files, The Truth Shall Out. And today I want to talk to you about a de facto breakaway group that existed of Aer Lingus pilots. They evolved from 1949 to 1950. In Christian ecclesiology, our Lord, as we know, had 12 apostles. A senior Aer Lingus captain, one of the 3 senior Aer Lingus captains that I've mentioned in the past 2 videos, was a man called Captain Tommy Hanley. And Tommy Hanley ended up with what can only be described as a breakaway, a de facto contingent of pilots who had grave concerns as to safety, flying safety within the airline, due to a measure that was being undertaken. Now, let me just recap a bit here. As I've already explained to you, on Thursday, July 21st, 1949, Aer Lingus IALPA staged the first ever strike with Aer Lingus, a full 1-day all-out strike. And at that point, the management started to take them seriously, and a tentative agreement was discussed that if Aer Lingus losses could be brought down to 6 figures, that is 100,000 or less, they would give an undertaking to look at permanent contracts with the pilots, along with pensionable a superannuation scheme. That was on July 21st, 1949. And 2 months later, the IALPA sought and ascertained a memorandum of understanding from the executive, Aer Lingus management. They were called the executive at the time. That this would be implemented pending end-of-year results. Now, simultaneous to this, the famous Captain John Cecil Kelly Rogers, who was Churchill's wartime pilot. Now, his story was covered in part 4, the last podcast. He was frenetically working on reducing the 3 to 2 man crews as American Airlines in America were doing. Now, this has already been explained across the course of the previous 2 videos. And he, along with the chief engineer, a man called Paget McCormack, and another chief Aer Lingus pilot called Captain William Scott, they were pushing this 3 to 2 man crew throughout late 1949 and well into 1950. The following spring, end of financial year 1949 to 1950, which was March 31st, 1950, Aer Lingus and the IALPA and all the people of Aer Lingus, in fairness to them all, they all played a role in this. They finally got the losses as agreed down under the 6 figures, and Aer Lingus finally held up their part of the bargain, which was permanent contracts and the kicking off of a superannuation scheme for the pilots. However, at this time, the momentum within the executive specifically to eliminate the radio officers was firmly in place. And in June 1950, Aer Lingus issued a stark statement, and I want to be very careful here from here on in with my claims, because I want to read exactly what that statement was. On Monday, the 19th of June 1950, Aer Lingus issued a stark statement, and this statement appeared in the media, as well as been an internal memorandum to the pilots, or to the radio officers and the pilots. And it stated, the changeover to radio telephony from Morse signalling will take effect from Saturday, the 1st of July 1950. It further stated that on Monday, the 31st of July, so that's a 2-month time gap, you could say, almost 2 months, it would give 17 of its 27 radio officers 6 months' notice of dismissal of their employment at the airline. Now, what happened after? The reason that they're keeping 10 of them is something I already discussed, and it's to do with the fact that Captain Hanley and a breakaway group were vociferously fighting this, and they had produced tests. One specific test carried out in May 1950 by Captain Joe Barrett, which was to prove that the safety practices of navigation were not up to scratch on what they should be. So in order to strike a compromise, the executive, under the guidance of Captain Kelly Rogers, they allowed 10 of the radio officers to be retained. Now, This was strongly discouraged, and indeed it was then announced that they would all be gone within a year at most, and they were gone, as we've already discussed. They were gone by September 1951. As I've already said, our Lord had 12 apostles. Captain Tommy Hanley had amassed a sizable but yet small contingent of pilots who were a de facto opposition group to IALPA at that point. And you must bear in mind, IALPA had got everything they had wanted at this point. They had got their superannuation scheme, and they had got permanent contracts, and the things were rosy between the management and between the pilots' union. So, but Captain Handley continued his rebuttal or refusal of the radio officers being dispensed of unless under the right terms and conditions. What Captain Handley didn't know was that Captain Kelly Rogers, when he'd be with management, he had a disparaging or pejorative term that he put on Captain Tommy Handley and his pilots, and he called them TJ's disciples, because Tommy Handley was also known as TJ. I guess it's Tommy Joe or something, but he was intermittently known as Captain Tommy Handley or Captain TJ Handley. And I believe that they never knew that this sobriquet had been put on them. It was a mean and it was disparaging, and as I say, I think a pejorative term on them, and it stuck with the management, and they would hilariously refer to it, here comes TJ and his disciples again. And in the end, I never ascertained how many exact disciples he had. I don't think he had as many as our Lord Jesus had, but I believe I counted at least 9 that he had, and I'm going to name them now. But again, I will refer to documentation that I have in order to get it right. Okay, so in Tommy Handley's band of merry men, the following had joined Tommy. Captain Joe Barrett. Now, Joe Barrett was probably Tommy's right-hand man throughout all of this. Captain Tommy McKeohane, Captain Bill Wallace, Captain Stan Wilkins, and Captain Stanley Williamson. Along with those captains, there were first officers Brendan Flanagan and Brian Noble. Now, one captain whose name I've deliberately omitted and leaving to last is that of our very own Captain James Richard, known as Jimmy Keohane. And of course, Captain Keohane would be the ill-fated captain on the St. Kevin. And all of these pilots were what was known as TJ's disciples, again secretively managed by Captain John Cecil Kelly Rogers and the management. There may have been 1 or 2 others. I honestly don't know. He may have had as many as Jesus had, but I can't say. But I've counted, I believe, 9, and himself is going to be 10. So it was sizable when you consider that there were 70 pilots in IALPA, and so what's that? 14% of these were vehemently opposed to the removal of the radio officers until proper things were put in place. Okay. As I've just explained, Aer Lingus issued the stark statement to both the pilots' union and the radio officers' union on the 19th of June 1950 that 17 of the 27 radio officers would be given 6 months' notice of dismissal, and the other 10 would be wound down over the period of a maximum of 12 months. I believe it went on for about 15 months, September 1951. And then there would be no more. Captain Handley, who was the president of IALPA at the time, and who was also the leader of TJ's disciples, the offshoot group, Captain Handley asked for a meeting with Captain John Cecil Kelly Rogers, the man who was famously known as Churchill's pilot, and he had a meeting with him on Monday the 26th of July 1950. So this would be 5 weeks after the stark notice of dismissal had been given by the management. And what you had were 2 aviation titans. Now, there was never any love lost between these 2 guys, and in fairness, they were both advocates of safety. In fact, Kelly Rogers' job was assistant general manager technical. Captain Hanley was, of course, was the IALPA president, and Captain Hanley explained to him that he had serious grievance over certain routes, and it wasn't even just the routes, it was the fact that under all of the wrong circumstances coming together, a pilot, even if trained in radio telephony skills, may not be up to the job. And that's a complicated reason for that, which I'll go into in a later video. And Captain Cecil Kelly Rogers sat calmly and listened to Tommy Hanley. Now, the meeting was pretty much amicable, and there was no voices raised. And Tommy Hanley explained to him that there were at least 3 routes he was very unhappy about this happening on. The radio officers being dispensed of. And he also accepted that, he reluctantly, I should say, accepted that the radio officers would eventually be a thing of the past, but it wasn't that they were going to be, it was that they were going to become a thing of the past prematurely without the proper safety adherence or the proper safety regulations being adhered to. Now, Kelly Rogers was extremely calm throughout the meeting, and if Tommy Hanley had taken a moment out of his mind, he'd have realised that Kelly Rogers must have had an ace card up his sleeve. After Captain Hanley had given his little speech, shall we say, Captain Kelly Rogers turned around and said to him as cool as anything, and again I want to read this so I have it precise. John Cecil Kelly Rogers turned around, he is cool as anything, cool as be damned, he says to Captain Hanley. Now, Tommy, these representations you're making are your own personal views and not those of your members. Now, Tommy Hanley may as well have been hit by a bus, because what effectively Kelly Rogers was saying was Kelly Rogers had been on the ground and he had been talking to the pilots, and actually he had been seen going around the airport talking to pilots, and there would be hush-hush groups, and specifically the TJ's disciples, he wouldn't have convened with them, but it was quite evident that Kelly Rogers had been going around on the ground, at the ground level, and talking to pilots, the ground troops, shall we say, and he had come up with his own consensus that the pilots were not reluctant as the way Captain Hanley was saying that they were. Now, Captain Hanley went home to his wife Agatha that evening, and he might as well have been hit by a bus, as well as been thrown under the bus by the majority of his members. He spent the next day pining over it and discussing with his wife and coming to all sorts of thoughts. What would he do? In the end, he tendered his letter of resignation on Wednesday, the 26th of July, 1950. And I'm going to post that up here. And the only problem I had with this is I don't know if the pilots accepted it. It seems it may have been a case of we better have him on board than outside in the ring than outside of the ring. I was never able to fully ascertain from today's IALPA as to exactly when the next changeover happened. But by the following winter, 1951 to 52, Tommy Hanley was not the president of IALPA. It was a man called Bill Martin. William Bill Martin was the president. So Tommy Hanley felt extraordinarily let down at that point, and there the issue sat for another few months. But there was to be another showdown, this time without Kelly Rogers, which I'll go into next. The second meeting that Captain Hanley sought and was given was one with the general manager, the top man of Aer Lingus, Jeremiah Dempsey, or Jerry Dempsey. Now, Jerry Dempsey was a very personable man, a great personality, and was loved and liked by all. But at the end of the day, he had a job to do, and that was to keep the airline obviously safe, but also to get it profitable, because it had been losing money hand over fist since the day one almost. And Captain Hanley put in one proviso in before this meeting was scheduled. He asked that Captain Kelly Rogers specifically be kept out of it. And in fairness to Dempsey, Dempsey said, that's fine, we'll have the meeting. And Dempsey went even a step further, and he said he guaranteed Tommy Hanley, Captain Hanley, president of IALPA, I believe at that point, he guaranteed him that there would be no repercussions for whatever came up at the meeting. Now, poignantly, sadly, prophetically, whatever word you want to use, when Tommy Hanley was getting ready to go to that meeting, who was off duty in the airport but Captain Jimmy Keohane of our ill-fated St. Kevin, and he went along with him, and Dempsey sat and listened to them and took notes, and was quite interested to hear about these potentially dangerous routes, one of which sadly turned out to be our very route, the direct route over Snowdonia. And Jeremiah Dempsey took notes and listened intently and told him he would give it his utmost perusal. And he followed it up, and he told them at the end, there was something that came out of it. He told them that a captain could request, at any time, he could request a radio officer. That would be the diminishing radio officers, because we're now going from 27 down to 10. But he assured him that if a captain requested it, he could have it. And Hanley, of course, his 3 points were nighttime flying, 3 specific regions, one of which was Snowdonia, and bad weather flying. And Jeremiah Dempsey conceded and said, yeah, we'll make an allowance for that. Now, that allowance was made, but it was frowned upon by management. They said it was open to the captain. The reality is that the captains rapidly, in diminishing numbers, started to request radio officers. And as I've already shown, the last known flight of a radio officer was September 1951, which of course preceded our fatal crash by 4 months. So it was just things were in motion was in play. Bad motion was in play. But out of the meeting, Tommy Hanley never did suffer any fallback or anything from management. He did, however, the following year, but that's a separate story altogether. And he had his entire career destroyed by the highest people in the Irish government. But I'll detail that in a later on video, because that doesn't concern our story at this point, but it will concern it at the inquiry phase, and I will detail that for you as well. Where a little snippet, a little wet appetite wetter for now is that Captain Hanley and his predecessor in the IALPA, Bill Martin, would have a showdown on the morning of the final day of the inquiry, behind closed doors, of course. Anyway, so that was the second meeting that took place, and again, something came out of this one, but too little, too late, shall we say. Okay. In February 1948, the Irish government shut down the overseas branch of Aer Lingus. It was a tentative company that had 5 very large jumbo piston aircraft, which were the Connies at the time, Constellations. And from that shutting down, some of those placements were seconded across to Aer Lingus. And one such man was a man called Harry Williams. Now, Harry Williams was in some shape or form related to Jeremiah Dempsey. He could have been a brother-in-law or a brother of a brother-in-law, but he was connected into him through marriage. And he was given the title in Aer Lingus of safety officer. And he had been writing up papers at the time, not only about the dangerous route, now this man was not a pilot, but he had specifically narrowed in on the Snowdonia, which was the direct route, the shortcut Aer Lingus were taking. But he also had an issue with the amount of de-icing and anti-icing fluids that were being carried on the plane, because there had been memos issued to Aer Lingus management about sometimes these would be short, or if they ran into a bad ice storm, they could literally run out of them. Very sadly, on the day of the Black Thursday of the crash, and completely nothing to do with the crash, but yet it could be argued everything to do with the crash. John Cecil Kelly Rogers held a meeting, and again, I want to be specific about what my claims here are. John Cecil Kelly Rogers had a meeting with the chief engineer, Captain Paget Oliver McCormick, and the chief flying instructor, who was then Captain Owen J. McAlinden. And their issue was over the documentation that Harry Williams was posting about within the company, memorandums, I guess. Now, Harry Williams was frowned upon by the pilots. They actually didn't take him too serious, and I believe that across the board with all of the IALPA members. both the company men and the non-company men. And they gave him the nickname High Tension Williams because he was always in a state of high tension about safety. But on that particular day, Captain Kelly Rogers approached him, which was again the ill-fated day, the Thursday, and he tore strips of high tension. How dare he come out with these claims, and it wasn't in his remit to go analysing this kind of stuff, and he didn't know what he was talking about. And they basically had a shouting match, or a one-way shouting match, and Kelly Rogers spared nothing in laying down the law, and that his job was to do his job and not to be interfering with company routes and stuff like that. And it was just very poignant. Now, on a personal note, I have to say that when I set out to do the St. Kevin series, I never anticipated I'd get all the documents I got. I got 1,064 highly sensitive and a lot of them secretive documents, including many witness statements that were all, according to the airline and the senior officials in the Irish Department of Industry and Commerce, which was then the transport came under that and aviation came under that. But none of these documents were ever meant to see the light of day. There were 2 documents that I knew about that I never got, whereas a lot of the 1,064 starting out the project, I probably knew of none of them. But once I started to make a listing of documents, there's 2 I never got, and one of them was this memo that was issued amongst the 3 aforementioned senior people about having tore strips of Harry High Tension Williams. But alas, poignantly and extraordinarily sadly or ironically, that took place on the very afternoon of the crash. And of course, Harry High Tension was advocating the route to Liverpool, which was basically you go up like a dog's leg and up to Wallasey at Liverpool, and then you bank across west to Dublin. And he was advocating that, and I think he'd written at least 2 memorandums to management that Snowdonia was a dangerous place to be flying, specifically in winter. Just very sad, the whole thing. But as you can see, it's a lot of sequences are falling into play here where the accident is almost entirely predictable. And there are others that I will go through in an upcoming video. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. Feel free to like, comment, share the usual stuff. Okay, cheers.